All right, everybody, welcome into this edition of Unidentified History. This is a very special edition of Unidentified History this week. I, of course, am your host, the lawyer Dave Ungar, coming to you here today, and I am thrilled to be able to welcome a guest into the show. And not only is he just any guest, folks, he is the host of Engaging the Phenomenon, a tremendous podcast and show. He is an actual experiencer. He is one of the foremost experts that I know of who deals with the consciousness side of the phenomenon, of the UAP phenomenon. He is the one and only James Iandoli. James, I really hope I didn't butcher the pronunciation of your name there. I even tried to give you a little like a WWE introduction there. You know, I didn't want to go too over the top with too many, adding on too many descriptors, but hopefully I did you justice, man. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. And that was quite the intro. So I appreciate it, man.
I know I told you, when we first started talking that I've been a pro wrestling podcaster for 10 years and started dabbling with this UAP aspect of things. I mean, I've always been interested in it, but a few months ago and kind of as I've been going along, I've noticed that some of the pro wrestling fans who have listened to the podcast for years are surprisingly much more interested in UAPs than I thought they were. And so I've had some people ask me some questions, and especially after the last hearing that I'm sure we'll talk about later on, you got a lot of questions about the video. And did that thing really deflect a Hellfire missile? And well, maybe. So on this episode, I want to try and thread the needle between the newbies out there who are just kind of getting, up to date with the phenomenon and learning more about it. And of course, people like you and me, well, you more than me, who are very knowledgeable in the subject, and maybe we can find some new information to impart to them. So again, thank you for coming on the show. Let me kind of start off with, let me ask you first about Engaging the Phenomenon. Can you tell me what's the show about? How long have you been on the air and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So Engaging the Phenomenon is an embodiment, so to speak, of my approach to the UFO phenomenon, which is through, consciousness studies and experiential approach, but also like a direct approach, rather than, you can do the research and read the books and even speak to witnesses and go over whatever information is available. And that's very helpful to kind of help add context to the conversation. But, ultimately none of that is going to satisfy your curiosity. And it's not going to give you that component of what people consider gnosis, like firsthand knowledge. And the only way to have the firsthand knowledge is through direct experience. And so Engaging the Phenomenon is really based in a way of being directly involved in, pursuing or trying to understand the phenomenon. And in my particular background, right, it's engaging the phenomenon through consciousness, right? Or through what people call CE5, human initiated contact. But I've been on, so I created the channel, man, I think I did the first podcast probably in 2021 or 2022, but I created the channel much before that. That was just the first interviews of when I was interviewing people publicly. But I've been involved in the field much, much longer than that. And, even interviews, I had been doing private interviews for many years, even in like 2009, 2010, I was private messaging with people like Rich Dolan, asking him all these questions, and Leslie Kane and many other researchers. I would just find their information and contact them and start talking with them. So I had been doing that for many years. And obviously what ultimately got me involved in research and directly engaging with the phenomenon is through my own experiences. So I tried to kind of bring that vibe, so to speak, to the podcast and to the UFO field as a whole.
And like when you first started reaching out to people like Richard Dolan, Leslie Kane, and I'm not sure I pronounced her name either, Kane or Keen.
Kane, yeah.
Kane. Did you find them they were receptive to you in the early days? Because I mean that's one thing I've noticed about the community is it's pretty open to talking and sharing information and that sort of thing. It as comparing and contrasting, like if you're talking wrestling podcast, if you don't have it in with WWE, they are not going to let you near their people, that sort of thing. And it sounds like with the UAP community, even the really well-known people will respond to you.
Yeah. I mean, it's becoming a bit more now just because it's the public awareness on UFOs or UAPs is so much larger now that I'm sure at this time they're getting slammed with requests. And I remember when Richard Dolan had to make a post on Facebook saying, "Hey, sorry guys, I'm just not engaging here anymore because I can't." Like it became too much.
Right.
But back then, I'm talking like 2009, 2010, we didn't have all the saturation in the field where there were hundreds of thousands and millions of people on a daily basis engaging with this subject and content, at least publicly. I'm sure that there were people like reading books and such and watching documentaries, but now it's become so much where people are getting flooded. But again, there are people, and I commend people like Dr. Gary Nolan, who's a friend of mine, who I had no business speaking to. This guy is like Nobel laureate, brilliant scientist, but he was open to having a dialogue with me for, starting back then and continuing until now. And he, generally speaking, I've seen him go on many different podcasts, and he's got a full plate. And so I think that the researchers, even the scientists and the journalists who are very involved in the subject, really have wanted to make a grassroots approach to the subject to get the word out, because it's such an important subject, and anybody you can reach it's important to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and I'm sure people, like you're saying, they're getting flooded, and there's a lot of trolls out there now that used to not be so prevalent, who are just looking for a way to stir up the pot and do something wrong. I was also going to ask you, like, I think a year ago you were on Vetted with Patrick, and you'd mentioned that you were working on a book. So I kind of wanted to follow up with you and see, like, how that was coming along or anything like that.
And that's a great question. And man, I didn't. I mean, when I was beginning to conceive the book, let me say, I didn't really know what I was in for, and it's become a much bigger and more meticulous project in that I'm still doing research to create the book. So what I thought that I had, that what I was going to do has completely transformed. And I've spoken to many people who have written books in different stages, and they say, yeah, that kind of happens. So it's I think now a little bit further away than I originally thought it was going to be, just because it's transformed into something else now.
Yeah, it's a very involved process. I mean, I did like my own self-published little thing trying to help people figure out how to cook brisket, because I got pretty good at it, and it throws so many people off, and that's such an involved process, just doing something like that. So I was just curious, because I know you've been on that UFO podcast a few times, and Andy just put out his book recently, which is really good and worth checking out. So I know he went through a lot of stuff with that, but hopefully you get it done, James, because I'd be fascinated to read what you have to say and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it definitely will be done. And I mean, I'm, it's, and part of the process for me is not just, research through reading per se. Like it has to do with practice, and it is. I really want to say it's not even going to be a UFO book per se, right? I mean, people in the UFO community and are definitely going to read it, especially those interested in CE5 and contact modalities per se. But I want to say it's bigger than just like than a UFO book in scope, at least, right?
Right. Got it. Well, let me get into, and I almost feel guilty about asking you this, but I got to ask you your origin story. And I feel guilty because I've heard you tell this story several times, and you just told it on Chris Leto's show like barely a month ago, that sort of thing. But from my standpoint, from the people who are listening on this end, they probably maybe have never heard your story before. And I know it's kind of broken up into a few parts. So I was going to ask you first about, your experiences up to 2007, because I know you have the big event in 2007 that changed a lot of things and really opened some doors. But I wanted to ask you about your earlier experiences. When were you first interested, or when can you first recall being interested in UAPs, UFOs, that sort of thing? Was there any sort of pop culture influence? Like, did any sort of movies influence you in that regard, or was it just always something that was there?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything started for me from a very young age in that, I was having spontaneous out of body experiences to begin with. And what people can consider entity encounters, but it was not with what people consider like the grays, little gray entities. It was more like shadow entities that had a scintillation. And actually, I think this is described, those kind of entities are described in Jim Lukatsky's newest book, from what I've heard, which I haven't read yet. But it started with that. And actually, those entities, that was highly telepathic. And at a very young age, that was actually pretty frightening. There was nothing threatening about it. It was just a new experience. And I was alone by myself in my room, and I didn't know what to make of it. So therefore, I was frightened. And it happened, more than half a dozen times over the course of a few years. And I never associated that with UFOs per se. Right. However, even when I was in elementary school, I would go outside and see UFOs, and I would try to take pictures of them with disposable cameras, and nothing ever came out. And it would be what people consider like orbs. They call them orbs in the sky, kind of moving in strange patterns and movements and things like that. So at that age, I didn't really have the ability to discern if it was a satellite or whatnot, but still thinking back, I don't think that's what those were. However, I also I live in the Hudson Valley, and there were a lot of people here when I was a child, when I was growing up, who had been a witness to what's called the Hudson Valley UFO wave. And actually, Dr. J. Allen Hynek's last co-published book called Night Siege is all about this wave, or this UFO flap that happened in the 80s, from maybe 81 or 82 all the way to 1990, really. But this area where I live still has a lot of UFO activity, and that may be in part due to the proximity to Indian Point, if you're making the nuclear UFO connection, which is a whole nother thing. However, because of my earlier experiences with out-of-body experiences, which again happened semi-frequently and spontaneously, and the entity encounters, again, I didn't consider those entities UFO occupants. That never really crossed my mind at that time. It felt more like a spirit kind of thing, even though it was highly telepathic and these figures had a form. But I was always interested in if something came on TV dealing with UFOs, I was like drawn to it, right? Whatever it was, like the late night TV shows that would come on at like midnight, 2 a.m. that were just like UFO files, right? They were cool,
Right.
man. I was always drawn to that and to the occult and things like that. Always, even, I don't want to even say occult. Let me say metaphysics. That sounds lighter, right? That kind of stuff always drew my attention because I had firsthand experience with it. I knew that there was something to it, right? Even if I didn't know what it was or which one was more authentic than the other, I had experiences and I didn't have to second guess it, right? There was no, is this stuff real? Like, I knew it firsthand, matter of fact, at least to my own experience. And so I had several UFO sightings when I was younger. But again, the 2007 experiences that happened that's in 2007, I was 20 years old, is what really pulled me into this very intimately. Again, I'm going to describe where I felt as if I was activated. I know people can take that in all kinds of ways, but so let me just step back and go through the experience, or
Sure.
what is actually a series of experiences. I'll try to give something of an abbreviated version, not too abbreviated, but so I was at this time, even 2007, practicing all types of meditation, like pretty intensely, right? And qigong, yoga, Buddhist meditation mixed with some Taoist techniques, because I was practicing Chinese martial arts at the time, and I was reading books on all this kind of stuff, remote viewing, all the remote viewing stuff, Jim Marrs books, Richard Dolan, the Jim Marrs books more. So one day I was working overnight shift at work, and I had a coworker who, who's an older gentleman. We always talked about, like work and family, that kind of stuff. Nothing ever like philosophical or unusual. It was kind of like, oh, what's going on at work and what's going on in the building, and how's your family? How's the kids? Great kind of thing. And one day before my shift ended, he said to me, hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico? I'm thinking to myself, like, why would he bring that up to me? That's like such a weird, out of place thing for him to say to me. He didn't know about any of my interest or anything like that, because I would not talk about that kind of stuff at work at this time. And I kind of thought it was weird, and I brushed it off, and I said, I didn't hear about it, because I hadn't. And so I finished my shift, and I went home, and that was that. So I went home, and when I went to sleep, I had this really insane kind of lucid or vivid UFO dream where I'm in the old neighborhood. Actually happens to be where I had those sightings when I was younger, because I had moved from there at this point. And I was in this dream where I'm driving down the street, and right above me, like right above my car, there's this like plasma orange electric energetic but formed flying saucer UFO thing that's made of like orange plasma, and it's emitting this kind of electricity, and I can feel it pulsing through my body. Again, this is a dream, and I'm just reactionary, so I'm trying to get away from it in this dream. I'm driving and very reactionary. So this goes on for 2.5 minutes, and I snap out of the dream. In the dream, I could never get away. No matter how fast I drove or what direction I went, the thing was always above me, and I could never get away from it. But anyways, I woke up, and I'm like collecting myself, like, that was weird. And I was just, after I had woken up, one of my family members had walked in the house, and it, again, I worked overnight, so I went to sleep, and I woke up maybe like 3:30 in the afternoon, and this is late spring. And my family member says to me, hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico? And at this point, the whole thing kind of hit me, because when I had the dream and I woke up, I was not thinking about what the guy said to me at all. It hadn't even occurred to me, especially because I was just waking up. But when my family member said that to me, I was just like, what the hell? Something is wrong here. And so I was just like, I need to just cool off. So I'm going to go down the street. There was this Chinese place that I used to always get chicken and broccoli, usually, especially after the gym. But, I was just I decided, let me just go there and just like clear my mind, whatever. Just, this is too weird. So I get in my car and I start driving, and within a few hundred feet of driving, again, it's 3:30 in the afternoon in late spring, clear blue sky. I see an orange fireball in the sky, like right in the center of my view, but in the sky. And I think, holy shit, that's a UFO. And as soon as I saw it, because it was stationary, as soon as I thought that thought, it started to move. And I was just amazed, but I was ultra excited. I was like, oh my God, this is really happening, kind of thing. And I started to chase it in my car, right? And it was just gliding across the sky, and it was a fireball. I say that it was like plasma ball. It had like a living quality to it. It was not just a light. It was, I don't know. I don't want to say it was organic, but it was like a lava lamp thing where it was more, not just pulsating, but it was alive in a sense, like in the sense that if you look at a fire, it looks like alive, that kind of quality to it, although it was contained in the sphere. And, I tried to follow this thing, and it eventually got out of my sight. And if anybody is familiar with the New York area. This happened by the Jefferson Valley Mall, just for context. And man, that whole experience, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And it wasn't until afterwards I was really thinking about it, which the craziest part is not even that, wow, I saw a UFO in broad daylight. Like, that part was amazing at first while it was happening. But afterwards, when I'm like thinking about the whole thing, what really blew my mind and still does was the sequence in events that it occurred. Like, what are the odds that one person says something to me, then I have this crazy lucid vivid dream, then another person says something to me, and then I have this encounter. It's not computable. In order for that to have occurred in that sequence, like, who arranged for that, right? Like, did the UFO intelligence somehow know that? Or that's the thing that boggles my mind. But that was this first experience in 2007. And then kind of going
Ask you
forward.
something, James.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you ever corroborate whether there was a UFO event in Mexico that these guys were talking about?
I looked, and I didn't see anything that stood out to me, but I haven't like in-depthly researched it where I think, I mean, there's UFO sightings every year, but this would have been
Right.
in late spring in 2007. I'm not sure. I mean, again, I've looked a little bit. I haven't gone crazy, but I didn't find anything where it was like, oh, there was this one incredible sighting.
That's it. I know I've heard you tell the story and just listening to it back here, I'm like, God, I wonder. I mean, you've got your guy at work and then a family member saying, "Hey, did you hear about this UFO in Mexico?" Like, well, they must have seen, you gotta, well,
There
I'd
had to been
say they must have
something.
seen something, but like you're saying, it was the intelligence just planting seeds. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just always curious about that.
There has to be. You know what? I should probably go deeper into that and find like this, you know, even though even if I found such an event, I don't know if I could say that's the one that they were talking about, but it would probably add more context.
Right, right. So, so you had this big event in 2007, and I know you kind of like, I think you've alluded to that this switched something on inside of you, at least your connection with the phenomenon, which was always there, like you're saying when you were younger, you had the interaction with the entities, and I believe you even said like one time you heard, or at least telepathically conceived something saying he can see us,
That's
and that sort of thing.
the first moment that I saw the entity at the exact same time. I mean, there's this telepathic quality. And if people are curious about telepathy and how it works and what it is, because the general consensus idea of, oh, what is telepathy? And like you see like Professor X going like this and you hear a voice, it's much more insane and more in depth than that. I mean, the word telepathy is trying to point to a particular phenomenon within psychic phenomena or anomalous experiences, but really there's a lot more to telepathy. And I encourage people to check out the telepathy tapes by Kai Dickens and Dr.
Yeah.
Diane Hennessy Powell that will really give you a better idea of when we say telepathy, what are we talking about? Because listening to that podcast, I could say, you know, part of what caught my attention about the podcast was the way that they are describing telepathy and consciousness and those kind of interactions in that podcast are exactly what I experienced, but with non-human intelligence. However, I have to say, I think the telepathy tapes is more incredible because just from human to human, to me, that's much more amazing than the even the UFO phenomenon having a telepathic capacity, because we can always say, oh, they have a higher technology, they're more evolved, and that's how it's happening. They're kind of facilitating it. But in the telepathy tapes, it's human to human. Humans are fluently interacting and engaging that way. And it's not just, oh, you hear a voice. There's a physical component, there's a consciousness download component. There's all these layers and levels to what telepathy really is versus the general consensus idea of telepathy means I'm transmitting some kind of audio into your mind and you're hearing it. It's much more layered in depth and contextual than that. You know, people talk about downloads and packed thought forms of like you get a download and it's like you got an entire book, right? Because there's all these layers to the information, and there's a whole process of digesting that and integrating the such like downloads. But
Yeah, like No, like you're saying the telepathy tapes, it's fascinating. Like I did the stuff about the nonverbal autistic children who are not only able to communicate telepathically, but able to, and I don't know how it works, I don't pretend, but kind of create a meeting spot telepathically where they can all get together and communicate with each other. And I go ahead. Sorry, James.
No, I was going to say, are they creating it, or does that space already exist? Right. And
Right.
this talks
Right.
about the dimensionality, and in these dimensions, right? I mean, we're using these words that are a bit contrived, but in these dimensional spaces, is that where the UFO phenomenon resides, or is just the UFO phenomenon able to interact on those levels fluently, just the way we would pick up a phone,
Right. Right.
But the part of my experience about the activation, so the experience I just described is one part of it. A few months after that, maybe a month and a half or 2 months after that, I had something akin to a near-death experience that I consider a trauma-induced out-of-body experience. And I'll actually say, there's like UFO experiences and UFO encounters. Like if I want to scale this, right, to give people a context, like all of these experiences are important and they can all show you things and teach you things about yourself and the nature of reality. But I mean, in my opinion, just to give people an idea, like if I had a scale of 1 to 100 or even like 1 to 1,000, I would consider like the UFO encounter thing, maybe like, a 20 or 50 or something like that. And the near death experience thing is like 1,000, right? Just like volumes greater levels of transformation, in my opinion. But in some weird way, they're kind of connected. Right. And that's just my experience. People may have their own kind of like scaling on how that is. But to me, the UFO experience and even the entity encounters were insane. And they were like completely transformative. You don't have an experience like that and come out the other end the same. It's just, it doesn't happen, generally speaking, especially if it's an intimate encounter and there's a consciousness connection, like the telepathic one. But the like a near death experience or the trauma induced out of body experience I had was just levels more transformative. And that happened. I was in this car accident, and I when the accident happened, and right when it happened, I found my consciousness above the scene of the accident, looking down on it. So because of that, I thought I had passed away. And the thing was, I was out of my body looking down on the accident where my body was. I was a point of consciousness looking down, yet I was completely aware. I was cognizant, right? It wasn't like in a dream where you're passive and you're just being pulled in different directions and watching. I was there watching and had reflective consciousness. I was like, so that's it, huh? Because I thought I had passed away, and I'm looking down at the accident and I'm deceased. I had that level of awareness looking down on the accident. And I mean, before I even got to that point, there was this really profound, like from when it first started, I was actually face to face with what you can call like a light being or light entity. And for some reason, and you can say this is in some kind of altered state, because I was in some kind of dimensional space when this occurred. And I was just face to face with this light entity that had a torso and a head and whatnot, and whitish blue light. And for some reason, I had like a direct knowledge, knowing that this light being was not separate from me. And I heard this like amazing, beautiful, crystalline, angelic orchestra. Like you can consider it heavenly, right? In the tonalities and the sound that just could not, you could not hear those sounds on this plane, is the way I would try to describe it. It was just like another level of experience of sound and harmony. And it was beautiful and incredible. And I heard, and again, at this point, I'm not very religious per se. I'm into metaphysics and I'm like researching all that stuff. So I'm not like, even though I was born and raised like Roman Catholic, I heard, that would not be my choice of like, oh, I'm a practicing Christian, right? That wouldn't be my go-to if somebody asked me, Yet during this experience, I heard a voice say, God is all there is, ever was, and ever will be. And, I mean, it was very powerful, but that's, that was part of the whole thing. And that's after that is when it's like, it was like my reality reset. And then I was the point looking down at the accident. There was like in this transition, this consciousness of, in my consciousness being this point of consciousness, observing reality and time as past, present, future simultaneously in a spherical point of view, if that's possible or comprehensible. And then again, and then I'm the point looking down at the accident, and it's really hard to describe this all linearly because the experience itself was transcendental. So trying to describe it in a linear sequence is a bit difficult. But after, I was looking down at the accident and I said, this is it, huh? I was at total peace with that. Right. Even though, later on I found out it wasn't a near death experience because I was not dead. I probably suffered a concussion, being in the car accident, but I was not flatlined or anything like that. However, during the experience, when I'm looking down at the accident, I had the consciousness to even think, oh, so this is it, huh? I was totally at peace with that idea. There was no regret or remorse, or I was totally fine with it, right? I was in a state of complete evenness or complete equanimity. There was no stress or worry or concern. It was just totally cool, like, if I can say it that way. And I was not really concerned about anything at all. And then within a few moments, I just, boom, I went back into my body and I woke up and I'm in the ambulance and I'm like, holy shit, I'm alive. And I had not realized actually until a few years later, constantly like thinking about the experiences and contemplating them, is that the point in the sky in which I was looking down at the accident would have been the exact vantage point of where the fireball UFO was when I observed it in the sky a few months before. And that blew my mind because I don't know what that means. Still, I still don't know what that means. And it gets me into contemplating things like retrocausality and just ideas that are kind of way out there in the sense of in consensus reality thinking of linear time and cause and effect, because that I don't know what that means, right? It's just, it blows my mind still. So that happened. And, the next day I was let out of the hospital. And I was just super grateful to be alive, right? I had still like a buzzing in my body from this experience, from the trauma-induced out-of-body experience that simulated like a near-death experience. I felt energetically different, but like viscerally different in my body, right? There was this after effect of like vibration and buzzing, and people talk about like high vibrations and high frequency and all that stuff, and I know that's kind of new agey language, but I physically felt that. And I was just grateful to be alive, to be honest. Like, I was at that point, I was really contemplating, like, I could have just been gone, right? If just one or two different factors were different in that accident, I could have been just dead, right? And not here. So I was just contemplating how amazing it is to be alive, to be able to freaking like breathe and experience things and just be here, right? And that alone was just like an incredible idea or experience even. So I get home and in the afternoon, evening, and then by nighttime in the evening, probably around 9 p.m., I was just in my room and I was just cleaning my room. Like, I'm just grateful to be able to do these menial tasks, right? Just the simple things that would normally just be like, oh, I got to do this. I was grateful to be doing. And, while I'm just cleaning my room, I get, again, this telepathic lock on, right? Which is, it's more than just auditory, but I heard and I felt and I saw, I had this this communication say, come outside. But when I heard that, there was a sensation through my whole body that was electrical. People may call it like a Kundalini effect. I was already feeling the buzzing in my body, right? That I'm talking about, the high frequency, but this jolted it up times 1,000. So I heard the voice say, come outside, but my eyes were open, right? And I'm in my room and I was cleaning, but there was an overlay in my awareness where I saw these entities you can say like I saw it in my mind's eye, because my eyes were open and I was seeing everything around me, but at the same time, simultaneously in my mind's eye, I was seeing these entities that, again, I hate to say this because it sounds so cliche, but like the Nordic type entities with like blonde hair, blue eye type entities in like these tight, like spacesuit things. There was like a lightish blue, a male and a female. And again, there was this whole download experience with this, but this is all going on simultaneously, where as soon as I heard that voice, it's like there was a connection formed in my consciousness with these other entities. That's how it felt, at least. And it's not just like a thought thing. Again, I physically felt this electrical energy throughout my entire body. Like my body was a circuit board. And so, and in the way I can try to describe it is I felt like my consciousness and my awareness and my emotions were connected to theirs and their level of awareness and their level of being. And but I run outside, and I have to, when I got outside, there's like a little bit of a tree coverage. So I had to kind of go a few forward, maybe like 15 feet to get past the tree coverage. But I knew everything that was going to happen already when the second that connection with the UFO or these intelligences were formed, that they were going to be here. But so I run past running to get to the clearage so I can look up into the sky, and before I can even get to that the clear point where I can look up, there was a low hum. It was a very bassy, like an amp, almost like electrical. I had an electrical pulse through my body when I heard this, and it was like vroom, 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 like slow, low hum. And every time that I heard that like hum, I felt that the pulse through my body. And when I get past the trees and I can look up past the clearing, I saw what looked like a hexagonal UFO that was just right above the trees. So to me, it looked like it was less than 100 feet in the air. And I say hexagonal, but it was almost like what people would consider a flying saucer, in the sense that it was like, it wasn't like it was like a wedge shape like this as far as I can see, but it looked like a hexagon, but the edges were not pointed at all. They were rounded. And there were lights like bleeding around the edges. And in the center, there was a completely, square white light fixture. And it was just gliding across. And I'm like staring at it and walking. And I had to go down this little staircase of like 5 or 6 stairs or whatever it is, and to get into my driveway. And I'm just watching this thing, and it's humming, and I feel the pulse. And as I'm watching it, it's just gliding slowly, and it instantly disappears and then reappears like 1,000 feet or more across from my driveway over this man-made lake. And instantaneous. There was not, it wasn't like, it's not even like it was there one moment and there the next. It was instantly there. There was not even that, oh, it's here and then it's there. It was instantaneously there. And when it went to the other location, and my attention was directed in that way, then I saw that there were 2 other crafts just like it in the sky that reappeared in proximity to them, and they were just moving in the sky. They were just moving. The lights are spinning around, not too fast. They were bleeding around, and they were slowly moving. Then one would disappear, and then reappear. And so at this point, as I'm watching them, I'm really thinking to myself now, like, holy shit, like did I hit my head so hard in that accident that I'm just hallucinating this? Because this is just insane at this point. Like, as I have like a second to actually think, I'm like, this is how can this be happening? So I ran into my house and there were two of my family members, and I said, guys, you got to come outside. And they said, why? I said, they're here. And they said, who's here? I said, just come outside. So they come outside, and we go into the driveway, and they see these objects, and it's like it's as if the objects are putting on a demonstration. And this goes on for more than 20 minutes, and
So
everybody's
this
yeah.
eliminates a concussion because you've got other witnesses corroborating that they're seeing the same thing you are, right?
Yeah. And while this is happening, I'm thinking in my head for some reason that everybody is aware of this event happening, because it just seems so over the top. And I just, in my mind, I'm thinking like, holy shit, I didn't have the word for it at the time, but I'm like, what people consider disclosure. I thought like, holy shit, the entire world is going to know that these things exist because they're just out here in the open. And it's not just like there's one here and they disappear after a second. Like, this is going on for 20 minutes. So in my mind, I think like the whole world is going to know about like UFOs and aliens, right? At this time. And I have to say, the entities, I don't know that that's what they actually look like. I kind of want to caveat, because I got this what you can call a download, and I always want to caveat it and say, to me, everything felt as genuine as can be, right? Some people will say, oh, that's the UFO doing some kind of manipulation or mind control or whatever. To me, it felt very genuine. However, that when I saw the entities, I don't know if that's what the entities actually look like, or they're communicating an image to me that I can relate to. I don't know, right? I don't know. And again, there was this whole pack thought form or download message that these entities communicated, that they're somehow related to us, and they do want people to know about them, and that they're here to help. And that whole kind of message you hear sometimes that experiencers will talk about. And I experienced that. And I, after years of contemplating it, I don't know to take that literally, right? I don't know if somehow my brain is trying to translate whatever they're trying to communicate, and there's an error in my interpretation based on the feeling that I felt when I was connected to them. I don't know. So I always want to say that I don't know what if that was just my flawed interpretation of the communication or something literal. But to me, especially during the experience, I was taking this all at face value when it was happening. It wasn't until later on that I was really questioning, like, is that what they look like? Or, and is that what they're trying to actually communicate? Or is this a form of manipulation? Again, it felt genuine to me, but I don't know. And so I want to state that to be clear. And so after that experience, that's when I was just like all in on this, in the sense, like I felt the need to be directly involved in the subject, because I had a firsthand knowledge of this, right? Like, I know this is reality. So I felt a sense of responsibility to share it, that like, hey, this is real. And, I had the sense, even like shortly after the experience, is like, talking about the subject is one thing, but for people to have the kind of transformation that goes with the UFO reality, in some sense, I think it has to be directly experienced. And that is how I ended up getting big into CE5. And I was already into the consciousness studies, but that embarked me onto the CE5 journey, which is another tangent.
Right. And let me ask you this. I want to go just backtrack briefly to the car accident and the out of body experience you had. So it sounds like you had, and you indicated there was no flat line, so you weren't clinically dead or anything like that.
Right.
But you had a lot of the telltale, I'm not going to say symptoms because that sounds like you're sick, but a
Yeah.
lot of the sort of experiences that people have with a near death experience, you beings of light, angelic music, that kind of sense of I don't know if you said that you felt this overwhelming sense of love or anything like that, but you did hear something
I did
involving God.
for sure feel that.
Okay. And so I'm wondering, James, because there what so this is not a near death experience, but it's got all the telltale signs of that. Is there something about just a traumatic experience in general that I think you've mentioned in other shows about like an aperture in your mind being opened up when some of this stuff happened. And do you think it's like these sort of experiences make somebody who, I don't know if you're predisposed to the phenomenon, but more capable of tapping into that? And I'm not going to say it relates to near death, but obviously you had a traumatic experience or something along those lines. Is that something that you think can trigger that sort of awakening?
I think so. And I mean, even just with a UFO encounter, these kind of things happen, and it could be gradual, right? With a UFO encounter, or maybe you have some kind of precognitive dream, and maybe you have a more subtle opening in the aperture of your awareness to what we can consider subtle realities, right? Which is, I think that these realities that are there, but we're not necessarily tuned into them, but they're always there and they always have been. It's a part of our reality. But for some reason, when some of these incidents or encounters occur, and again, like I would say, the UFO encounter, maybe if you have a precognitive dream, it's a subtle experience of experiencing that subtle reality, and it gives you like a more gradual taste or opening. You have a UFO encounter, maybe that's a step up because you have this objective object that's there, so it's more real than just like, oh, you can kind of write off a precognitive dream as coincidence or whatever. But now you have a UFO, there's some kind of communication, there's an interaction, and there's entities or a craft and a light that you can see and other people can see. It feels more real. So that conviction opens the aperture a little bit more than maybe a precognition event would for some people. But again, the trauma-induced out-of-body experience or near-death experience just shatters the whole lens of the aperture. And now you're just completely open. That's how I would describe it. So,
Right.
yeah, the psychic phenomenon or even poltergeist activity and ghost stuff or like all that stuff, I think are subtle openings depending on how extreme they are, right? And then maybe a UFO experience, again, it's more of the conviction of your experience. Like, 'cause you can always write the other ones off a little bit like, oh, whatever. But once you get to the UFO experience, it's like, okay, other people saw this object, this strange light, but I felt this communication and it interacted and what have you. So that's like that's that because of your conviction and belief in the experience. I think it opens it a bit more. But again, the near death experience just shatters the whole lens altogether, and you're just completely open at that point. I think that's how I would try to describe that.
I think it fascinates me because the skeptics of the NDE will talk about it's the brain releasing hormones, chemicals, neurotransmitters, something like that to try and cope with the physical process of dying. But you didn't have any of that going on.
Right.
So it tells me, okay, that this concept that is just the brain's way of coping with dying, it's not a complete explanation. And I don't really buy into it anyway. But then you have an experience like yours. Well, this spontaneously happened without any of that stuff where the brain is going to release all these hallucinogenic or coping mechanisms on super steroids. So you didn't have that, but there's still that similarity there.
Yeah, but the people that are trying to make those kind of arguments are invested in the belief that consciousness arises from the brain. So, and they're not kind of on board with the idea that we're in a field of consciousness and that the brain is just a receiver antenna that's, translating that consciousness from the field into images or whatever. So we can have like a point of reference that anything that deviates from their beliefs, which is what they are, those are beliefs, because science doesn't say that consciousness arises from the brain, right? That's the hard problem, the hard consciousness problem. So, they're making the assumption that consciousness arises from the brain, and therefore if something doesn't fit that preconceived notion, then whatever comes after can't be possible. So I emphasize or I try to have compassion for that, because that's what they're being told by their mainstream institutions, right? So,
Right.
or I mean, that's at least the old story, because a lot of the discoveries that are happening in the last 10, 5, and the last few years they're telling us a different story about reality. And
Right.
it's mind blowing, because it's so new that it's not even being taught in schools, really, right? Maybe like at university levels, but that's like a small few, and you don't have like a complete picture yet, because they're making these discoveries and like, oh my God, what do we do with this information? Because it doesn't fit into the previous paradigm. So what do we do with it? So that picture of reality is still in the process right now of being reformulated. And, you know, the UFO phenomenon kind of fits right in. It nudges right in with all that, because, I usually say that the UFO phenomenon is like a bridge between physics and metaphysics, because it demonstrates both our old paradigm and a new paradigm simultaneously. Because here you have allegedly, right, a physical object that can be tracked on radar. It's on the gun camera footage. They're observing nuclear facilities. So, and there's biological effects. So it's as far as we can tell, a physical object, as just as I'm a physical being, and the house and the rocks and grass, whatever, cars, jets, there's a physical object present during these phenomena that occur, that again, people can track them on radar and capture them on gun camera footage. However, they're demonstrating what we would consider something that's metaphysical, right? They're disappearing and reappearing. They're utilizing telepathy. They're bilocating. They're doing all these things that we cannot explain with our current set of physics. It's almost as if the UFO phenomenon is again demonstrating that the way that we're looking at our current world and physics are outdated, and that they're literally demonstrating in front of us, showing us that there's a lot more to reality than our current paradigm allows for. At least, I guess, the old one that's currently being revamped, right? We're getting like a new operating system basically by the end of this whole charade, because the UFO phenomenon is, again, it's there's a physicality to it, but there's something much more going on. And it's not just like, wow, there's these objects and they're out there. It's also like, what is it saying about us? Other than that, potentially we're not alone, right? And potentially never have been, because every religion talks about entities coming down and interacting with humanity, right? Like almost every religion, is the basis of the religion has to do with that kind of idea. There's angels, or Ashura, or devas, or jinn, or whatever you call them, and they're taken as a serious part of the religion, and if you're to take it seriously, reality. So the UFO phenomenon is like the center of an intersection that's like showing us that there's a lot more to reality.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to segue into like your area of expertise, because you've touched on a lot of things involving consciousness, and on that side, with that aspect, and I've heard, and I mentioned Andy's show earlier, that UFO podcast, and he's talked about how a lot of his friends who he'll talk to, and they'll run their own podcasts, and he'll talk about the UAP stuff, and they're not UFO people like we are, strictly speaking, but they'll be interested in, like you're talking about, the physical aspect, the nuts and bolts aspect of the craft, and all that fun stuff, things that, videos and things you can look at. When you start talking about the consciousness or anything that, people will call the woo based sort of aspect of things, they start checking out. And I'm just wondering, to me, it seems like, well, this almost creates a stigma within a topic that's already stigmatized by a lot of people anyway. Why do you think people shy away from this aspect of the phenomenon so much? How do you think, what's the best way to navigate that, to get, like, people are just starting to get into the topic and starting to learn about it? How do we introduce them to the consciousness aspect of things without just sending them running for the hills?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way you described it is perfect, right? Because that there's already a stigma around this issue. And within that stigma, there's another layer of stigma when you get to the consciousness stuff. And, for many years, ufologists struggled to try to prove to people that UFOs exist. And in order for them to do that and to be taken seriously by mainstream science, they tried to frame it in a way that would appease the scientific community. And when you got to people like Dr. Jacques Vallée and Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who are like the grandfathers of modern ufology, some of them at least, they would tell you like, there is this stuff, and the Air Force is documenting all this stuff in Project Blue Book and taking reports. But when you sat down and you talked to the individuals that were having the experiences, there was so much going on there that Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who is an astronomer, created the term high strangeness. And if there was an aspect of high strangeness to their encounter, it was more likely that it was a genuine UFO experience than if it were like the testing of a covert secret military craft or what have you. That the high strangeness component is actually a telltale of this. A counter probably has to do with NHI or non-human intelligence or the anomalous, rather than it being a misidentification of a plane or Venus or what have you, or again some kind of covert technology that's being tested. So, I mean, for me, it's simple, right? Like the direct experience is what is going to show you, matter of fact, that there's this consciousness component to it. And that's why I got really into CE5 and was very much part of what is called the CE5 initiative, because, even going back to my experiences, I knew that just like telling people about the experiences, that's not enough. And even if they believe me, it still doesn't have that transformative quality to it where you have an opening in your awareness, right? I mean, if you read a UFO book and you're like, wow, maybe we're not alone in the universe, that is the beginning of an opening in awareness. But again, when you have an encounter, that really broadens your aperture and your awareness to a much greater paradigm. And very akin to what the great and the late Dr. John E. Mack called the passport to the cosmos, because it really opens you up to possibility, because you have to rethink basically everything you were ever taught about reality and about our world and our place in it, because more or less what the mainstream scientists are telling us is we're alone in the universe and everything is random and we don't matter. But actually, that's not true. There's a lot more going on, and we're not alone. And probably in some way, shape, or form, we're co-creators through our consciousness, right? And that's what's a much bigger part of the UFO phenomenon, right? Is not just that it's there, right? We're able to interact with it. There's this interactive quality, and we do it through consciousness. And and for people that are curious about the consciousness stuff, there's been a ton of papers in parapsychology is like the official name for it, or psychic phenomenon, by like people like Dr. Dean Radin, right? Or we have pioneers like the late Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon. He's an Apollo astronaut, and he created the Institute for Noetic Sciences that's studying consciousness based on his own experience. He did an ESP test when he was on the moon with other people in NASA, and he had this whole experience out in space looking at the Earth. So, and actually, if considering like research, the research that's been done on psi phenomenon or psychic phenomenon is actually much greater, at least in the public domain, on the research that's been done on UFOs, even though UFOs are physical objects. So, the consciousness thing, I look at it as, when people are ready to go there, it's there. But, general consensus reality is still coming on board with the idea that, holy shit, UFOs are real. That's kind of been what's going on 2000 to now. and onwards, right, is that in a consensus reality, prior to 2017 and the New York Times publication of the initial two videos that came out, the Tic Tac video and the Gimbal video reported by Leslie Kane, Ralph Blumenthal and Helena Cooper, when that story came out, I think it just shocked people, right? That the New York Times was reporting on this, and then people discovered, oh, there's a Pentagon program dealing with UAP. So therefore, this is real, right? There's a lot of controversy about the details of all that, and no doubt that there's a counterintelligence component to that. That's just the way that defense works, right? And the military-industrial complex works. Therefore, there's confusion about the details of the program and what happened, what they studied, and so on. But, subsequently, there was another video released, and there's been witnesses that have come forward and other people saying, yeah, I was part of the program and we did study UAP, and there were absolutely anomalous things. And not only were there anomalous things, there were crash retrievals and the retrieval of biologics, right? When David Grush came out and really put his testimony under oath to Congress in 20, yeah. And so that was a big step forward. So you have to talk to people on their level. For the people that are not ready for the consciousness conversation, start with the basics. But I guarantee you start with the basics and you're there long enough, you're going to end up finding yourself into the stranger aspects, into the consciousness stuff, because that's what actually happens.
Right. Yeah. And I really appreciate the explanation, and it's good advice. You've mentioned CE5 in a few places. So from the standpoint of the newbies out there coming in and looking at this is like the CE5 for dummies section of the episode. So what is CE5, James?
Yeah, CE5 stands for a close encounter of the fifth kind. That term was coined by Dr. Stephen Greer, highly controversial figure within ufology for
just a bit, yeah.
For good reason. There's a lot of reasons for that.
True.
And that's a whole podcast within itself. I can promise you that. But
it is.
It really is. It is worth exploring for people who want a history on that. But just to cut to the chase with CE5, Dr. Stephen Greer was an experiencer who had a lot of really intimate UFO experiences. He also had a near-death experience. He was a medical doctor, trauma doctor, emergency room physician who was also an advanced meditator who, according to him, during one of his encounters, that he developed what he calls the CE5 protocols. And so that is what we can say is a human-initiated contact event, right? It's CE5 is ultimately a close encounter of the fifth kind, which is a close encounter in which the individual is not a passive bystander, right? So there's actually two layers of CE5 in that regard, second degree and first degree, where the second degree is you happen to be somewhere and you see a UFO and you think to it and it interacts with you. That's the second degree. The first degree would be like you're in a location, there's no UFOs around, and you do the CE5 protocols or something akin to it, and you invite them in and they come to the location. That's a first degree CE5. So this idea of CE5, Dr. Greer framed it, in my opinion, in a contemporary way. But that idea is that it's not actually new per se. I think he'll even say that himself. There was a group in the 1970s in Lima, Peru with Sixto Paswells called Mission Rama, who was doing the exact same thing, right? They were doing meditation. This individual, Sixto Paswell's story is another fascinating rabbit hole. But just for some context, Sixto Paswell's father was a UFO researcher in Peru, took him to a UFO convention. At the UFO convention, there was a second degree Freemason teaching telepathy with non-human intelligence, which happens to be in some pockets of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, where interactions with non-human intelligence has to be part of the later initiations. And he learned this technique from this 32nd degree Freemason, and he was already practicing yoga, right? So he had some idea of meditation and that kind of thing. So he took this practice and he brought it home with him, and his family started having these UFO encounters, through meditation and whatnot. And the further you go back in history, there's all different modalities, what we call contact modalities, to interface with the UFO phenomenon, or whatever people will say, elementals, spirits, jinn, whatever and is that even the same thing about as UFOs, right? You get into this whole mess of complexity. And when we talk about the UFO phenomenon, what are we talking about? Are we talking about just aliens? Are we talking about just physical metal craft? Are we talking about extra dimensionals, extra tempestrials, beings visiting us from a different time through UFOs? Right? There's a whole complex thing there. But CE5 itself, the close encounter scale was created by Dr. Jalon Hynek, right, who was the astronomer for the U.S. Air Force Project Blue Book. That was the official U.S. Air Force investigation into UFOs from 1952 to 1969. And Dr. Jalon Hynek came to categorize these experiences. He came up with the close encounter scale. So there's a close encounter of the first kind, which is if you see a UFO within, in this scale, it's 500 feet, but we'll just say if you see a UFO and you're in close enough proximity to discern kind of what it is or what it is not, that's a close encounter of the first kind. Close encounter of the second kind is you have a UFO and at least some kind of physical trace. That could be a radar trace. That could be a trace where the alleged UFO comes down near the trees or near the grass and there's burn marks, or there's some kind of radiation that's left behind, some kind of trace that's physically, trackable that you can measure. That's a close encounter of the second kind. Close encounter of the third kind, as probably everybody here knows from Steven Spielberg's movie, is, related to UFO sighting. There's occupants that are seen, right? Like the grays, or I guess, some kind of entities are seen in proximity to UFO that are non-human in origin. That's a close encounter of the third kind. A close encounter of the fourth kind, which was not made by Dr. Alan Hynek. It came on and it was added to his scale a number of years later. I forget the individual who officially added it to the close encounter scale. But a close encounter of the fourth kind is considered an abduction, UFO abduction, or, some people would put it nicely, right? Or they'll reframe it in the way they'll say it's an onboard UFO experience, just for the diversity there. And that brings us to the close encounter of the fifth kind, is which it's a human initiated contact with UFOs, where you do protocols and you invite UFOs to the research site or your location.
CE5, how does that differ from remote viewing or anything involving like psychedelics such as DMT or anything like that?
I did a video on this a long time ago. Just a brief kind of rant. So I would consider those experiences a different category. Like I was even joking around in the video, and I would say I would categorize it like a remote viewing experience or an astral projection experience or a lucid dream experience or a psychedelic experience as another category of close encounter, because they're highly subjective, for better or worse. They could be a very genuine experience, but it's a different category in the sense, if you're doing a CE5 or a human initiated contact event, you're in a location and other people are seeing in real time what you are seeing, so that I put it in its own category as CE5 for that reason. And, all this, like the remote viewers for U.S. Army intelligence and Grill Frame and Stargate, Uri Geller, Ingo Swann, all those guys, Joe McMoneagle, saw UFOs in their remote viewing, right? It was uncanny. And I would consider that like close encounters of the seventh kind. I hate to be so categorical or discriminating, but it deserves its own category.
Understood. Yeah. And thank you for that. Are there aspects of CE5 that if people are new to it, they wanted to kind of engage in that sort of thing, what kind of practical advice would you give them and what would you warn them about as far as any sort of pitfalls at the experience that they might actually have?
So my disclaimer for CE5 is, I mean, it would be the same for people who want to investigate in remote viewing or astral projection or out of body experience as well, because again, all these remote viewers, they were having interactions with UFO intelligence, except, with CE5, they come down into the research site or your backyard, depending where you're doing it. So you don't know how you're going to react to that kind of experience. I mean, you may think like, wow, I want to see a UFO, but once you have that experience, there's like a point of no going back, in a sense, where you don't know how you're going to react. Not in a sense, in my opinion, where it's going to be harmful, because 99% of people who go out to do a CE5 have a positive experience. I mean, I've been involved, and I know people are very cautionary towards CE5. They say you don't know what you're messing with, and to some extent, yes, that's true. I mean, however, I've dealt with thousands and thousands of people that have been out in the field, being somebody who was very central in the CE5 initiative starting back in 2008, 2009, and formulating the first CE5 social networking groups and connecting hundreds, if not really thousands, of individuals and going out in the field with hundreds of different people and, coaching thousands of them. But you don't know how you're going to react. And even if you have the most positive UFO experience, like I did, right? Like my experiences seemed super positive to me, right? I take that away from them, that they were positive. You could just decide like, oh my God, holy shit, UFOs are real, aliens are here, or however you want to frame that and whatever you believe. Why am I working this bullshit 9-to-5 job? Right? I could be contributing to humanity by just like doing this full time. Or how's your spouse going to take that? How are your friends at work gonna look at you when you start telling them, hey, I did this meditation, I had this UFO come into my backyard, or whatever it is, right? You have to consider those things. And kind of the way that I parse this out is like, there's people that are they don't give a shit. They're gonna do it, right? And to me, that's the right attitude. The people that are just like, I don't give a shit, I'm gonna do it, right? Those are actually the people that are gonna excel at it, because they're in it, right? They have the conviction, they have the passion, and that kind of motivation, or even intention, the intentionality and focus that they bring to it is probably going to lend to a much more direct experience than somebody who's on the fence, right? Who's like, I don't know if this is real, or I don't know if I should be doing this. Should I really be doing this? Like, that mentality is not going to be conducive to having the experience, right? I mean, people who are just like, I don't give a shit, I need to know, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going all in, right? That attitude is going to garner success, right? Success, sure, it comes in different levels, because for whatever reason, some people are like, in my case, I had the previous experience, so I had all the conviction I needed, right? So it was natural for me afterwards to have those kind of encounters. But you can be skeptical and still go all in, so to speak. I've seen people come from all different like walks of life and opinions and ideas come into CE5 and have an experience. But again, you can have a seriously positive encounter, and it could be great for you. It could be a great kind of part of your path, but it could be also that you have this UFO experience, and now the aperture begins to open, and your current consensus reality begins to crack, and now for whatever reason you're having a precognitive dream, or you have some kind of dream, and you have an interaction with your deceased grandma, right? And there's some message for you, or some other psychic phenomenon comes online, or some other what people call poltergeist activity, the hitchhiker effect, which Valet called post-contact offense, begins to occur, right? So you're opening yourself up for sure to another level of reality. It's there anyway. You're now just aware of it. And, there's not really a going back button. There's no rewind on this. Once you're there, you're in it.
It's like, it's weird. I went to contact in the desert this year for the first time, and they did the stargazing sort of tour that you go out there under the stars and everybody's hunting for UFOs and that sort of thing, which is fun. And there's a group of people who were doing CE5, and they went off to the side and they did their thing. And, when we got back on the bus, I couldn't help but overhear some of the stuff they were saying. And I'm like, what the shit are these guys talking about? Because they saw things that the rest of us didn't. And I'm wondering, is that something common? Like, if there's a group of people and there's some who are doing it, and I don't know if you've been in that situation before, but if there's some doing it and others who aren't, is that common that they will see things that the other people will have no clue that it's going on around them?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in like public parks doing CE5, and there's like a small group of us, and we see these things, and there's other people there. They're just not even looking up. I mean, in your case, there were other people stargazing, but I will say, if you're serious about CE5, and I know they have these Skywatch events, in my experience, those kind of bigger Skywatch events are not conducive to a successful, intimate CE5 or close encounter. Like, again, I mean, I'll just say as an example, you have Christopher Bledsoe doing these Skywatch events, right? And there are misidentifications with everybody, right? I mean, it's part of the learning curve, is that there's going to be misidentifications. But let's just say Dr. Greer or Chris Bledsoe or you or me or whoever does a big CE5 with 1,000 people. I mean, the level of coherence in the consciousness thing, we're kind of getting into the consciousness studies aspect of it. There's a fragmentation and coherence at that point. So if you have a smaller group, you're more likely to have a more intimate and direct contact experience. Now, again, I've been in public areas, public parks, and done CE5, and I didn't really say to the people, "Hey, are you guys looking at that?" Like, there was stuff going on, but the people that were participating were looking directly at it. We were in tune with the experience whatsoever. So, but there are even occasions where I was doing a CE5 with one other person, and in broad daylight, we saw this ruby red object in the sky, and we both clearly saw it. And to me, I was just assuming they were seeing what I was seeing, because they said, "Do you see that red, the ruby red?" They're like, "Yeah." And this, I saw it as a sphere, oval or sphere. And this individual who I was doing the CE5, again, it was a broad daylight ruby red object. They were an artist, and they said, "I'm going to draw a picture of it," because they were drawing pictures of all the CE5s we were doing together. They were doing art for each one. And so she drew the object, and there was a triangle. And I was like, "What?" I said, "What is this?" She said, "That's what I saw." I said, "I saw a sphere. Like, clearly, I mean, it was up in the sky, but it was as clear as day to me that it was a spherical object, sphere or oval." And she said, "No, I'm sure it was a triangle." Right. But we both saw the ruby red part of it. Maybe her eyesight's a little better than mine. I don't know. But we were both next to each other. And for whatever reason, we saw something slightly different. Jacques Vallée has talked about this. This happens sometimes in witness events, but there is a thing, I don't know if this is because the UFO phenomenon is dictating who is within their visible range, to what extent. I don't know if I should assume that much influence or control of them, right? But there is a pattern in that kind of thing where different people will see different things, or somebody will see something and someone won't. Another incident like that is, I was actually at a CE5 training with Dr. Stephen Greer in 2010. And during the first night, we were doing the meditation and all this, and within the first few minutes after that meditation, we were doing it out on this patio in this resort in Rio Rico, Arizona. And on this, it was a tremendous patio, but on this patio where we're doing the meditation, and there's a immaculate view of the sky, in the proximity of where everybody was, I saw a ruby red orb, almost the size of a basketball. And it was probably 20 feet away from me and 15 feet in the air. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, "Holy shit." And I'm looking around. Because I'm like, is anybody else seeing this? And like, there's nobody else like, "Oh," like gasping or anything. So I'm like, I'm not, And the way that this ruby red orb looked like, and I've had other experiences like this, and people will call this like a transdimensional object, right? Or an extra physical object, hyperspatial object, is that it looked like it was imprinted on top of reality. That's the way I would describe it. It's like if you stared into light for a few seconds and then you look away and there's that after image effect, it almost looks like that, right? But it's there. Like it doesn't look like a hallucination like that. It looks like it's actually there. So I'm looking around and nobody else is pointing at it or whatever. And I'm just like, I'm not going to say anything because I don't know if like my mind is playing tricks with me and I'm seeing something because I want to or what. So I'm just going to shut my mouth about this, because if I point this object out and somebody's like, I don't see anything, I'm going to look stupid, right? Pretty much. Or, so I didn't say anything about it. And then like 30 seconds later, Dr. Stephen Greer takes his laser and circles the area and says, there's just a ruby red orb here. So I saw it. He saw it. I don't know if anybody else saw it, but I don't think that the whole group saw it, because there's nobody jumping up and down like, oh my God, look at that thing. But we, for whatever reason, we saw it, and there was another 200 people at that event. Maybe at the time, maybe there was like 150 or so who were actually there for that part of the event. So there is that quality or aspect of the phenomenon that does occur.
So yeah, it sounds like, talking about the aperture opening, like for you and Dr. Greer, it was open enough that, you guys discern that this is going on, but some of the other people there, even though they're engaging in it, just may not have been able to appreciate that, hey, this is going on right now. So there's a level of individuality still to the phenomenon, even for those who are engaging in this higher form of contact.
Yeah, and I mean, it could be for some of the people that they're, and this is why you have to, if you're going to do something like CE5, you don't want to box it into what you think is going to happen, right? You have to let it happen as it's going to happen and just be an observer. And I mean, you're going to have expectations. It's normal. We're human, but be cognizant of what your expectation has, and be open to the idea that what you actually will experience may not be what you expect it to be. Because you can be looking up in the sky all the way, in the stars, for something to come out of the clouds or come down, from the stars or something like that. And there's orbs in the proximity of the group, which is something I've seen and experienced many times, which is, I mean, again, but you're just staring up and doing a sky watch, and there's other stuff going on, right? And that's not even getting into like, okay, you're out there and you're looking into the sky and not into like this is going to be like the woo, right? Your inner awareness, and is what's going on in consciousness, right? Like, are you getting some kind of message, right? Or, I mean, that's really getting into the woo stuff, but this is the stuff that happens, especially when you're doing it with a group. But there's also the instance where like the UFO phenomenon is very direct. In like, there was one example, me and my friend Dave, we used to do CE5 on an almost daily basis. And, we set up our CE5. It was just me and him doing a CE5. So we sat across from each other in the field so that I can see behind him and he can see behind me. So we have a kind of full spectrum awareness of the field site. So if anything happens behind me, he's going to see it. And anything behind him, I'll see. So for two people, we had the best kind of vantage point we could of anything going on. And, we do our CE5 protocols, which are a little bit different. The whole CE5 protocols is a whole conversation into itself, but there's many ways to go about it. We did our basic CE5 protocols, and I saw what's called a flash bulb. It's like a pinpoint burst of light, right? And it can either be singular or it can repeat. There's many ways in which it can occur. And I saw it, like, and again, it's just right. It's exactly where I'm looking, right in the center of my view, right? Very directional. And I just saw a flash bulb. And then, he, he turns to see and look to the location. He doesn't see it, but then he goes back to looking his viewpoint, and he goes, I just saw one. And I turned, and it flashed a few more times, and then so there was one on each side of us. So he was able to see it and I was able to see it. And again, that's very intentional on the behalf of the phenomenon.
That's so interesting. Just the it seems that way. Sometimes it's very direct. Sometimes it's a lot more subtle. Like you're saying, like you're
Well,
saying, everybody's looking to the sky,
and
and this
here,
stuff's happening around you.
well, and this is also, part of the nuance of CE5 that's not too often discussed, because I guess CE5 still is a bit stigma in the sense of the UFO and ufology and UFO studies, right? So the more people that are involved in the CE5, the more fragmented the group is going to be, right? So if you're just doing it by yourself, it's all directed at you in a sense, right? You still want to have the awareness of, is there anything going on around me, or, what have you, and drop the level of expectation. But the more individuals you add to the CE5, the more fragmentation there could be. You want like coherence. So even if you have like 3, 4, 5 people, the more regularly that you practice with them, I would say your success is going to go up, because the group is going to form a coherence among each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's like anything else that, like a team, the more
Yeah.
you practice as a team, the better the team is. I mean, unless you're like me and are a fan of the Washington Wizards, and that's not going to be a team that gets good anytime soon, but we don't have to get into that. But we've talked a lot about the consciousness and so many different aspects of things. So I want to ask you, is this all connected in your opinion? I mean, you're talking about UAPs, you've talked about ghosts, poltergeists, cryptids, angels, demons, and all sorts of other entities like that. It seems like humanity has, not to steal from you, has been engaging the phenomenon in one form or another for millennia. Um, and do you think do you think it is all connected? Like, are the religious texts really people who've misinterpreted
Well,
this phenomenon?
so, that's a great question. I do want to get into that in a bit of a nuanced way. Just because it's connected doesn't mean it's all the same thing either. There are aspects of the UFO phenomenon that seem like it could be like a physical phenomenon, right? There are instances where, there's you have the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And, that in the 90s, or really in the 50s and 60s, that was a very popular idea, because we started the space exploration and the space missions. So these anomalous objects must be from space, right? It's just the most obvious idea. So it was very popular in ufology at the time. It was, at that point, it was in vogue. It was sexy. Now, our science and space exploration has advanced. Everything looks so far away, light years. Nothing can really seems like it'd be, even if they were traveling at the speed of light, it would still take them like thousands of years to get to us. So that doesn't really make sense. So the interdimensional hypothesis is very popular now, which Jacques Vallée championed in the late 60s, early 70s, when he began to broach those ideas. That, wow, maybe they're from a different reality or time space and they can just blip into our reality. That makes more sense, in the sense of, instead of them traveling from A to B. So that's just to put this conversation into a bit of context. However, I hate to say this, but I think it's something like all of the above, because the idea that we're being visited by advanced extraterrestrial intelligence, to me, if there's an intelligence out there that's millions of years advanced, why wouldn't they? Right? Why wouldn't they have found a solution to that? In the course of 1,000 years, we can look back at our ancestors 1,000 years ago and be like, man, they really couldn't do anything, right? Like they didn't even have toilets or whatever, right? I mean, look what we have now with these smartphones, AI. We're a different civilization. So an extraterrestrial intelligence that's a physical being like us, that evolved on another planet out in space, that's 1,000,000 years ahead of us, you don't think that they can figure out how to get from there to there? Like, you don't think that they've advanced in physics so much that they'll find a way? I think that they could. So although the extraterrestrial hypothesis ETH is not popular by today's standards because it's not sexy or in vogue, and with the modern scientific discoveries of dimensions and whatnot, I do think that, of course, that the idea of the extraterrestrial hypothesis is very likely. I think it's very probable that even if they're extraterrestrial intelligence, why wouldn't they be able to interact with dimensions and still be able to blip in and blip out, right? I think that they would find a way to do that, but also that there could be entities from higher spatial dimensions, which we don't really understand, right? I mean, I can say that word, and I'm not a scientist or even an academic. I'm just an experiencer, more or less. I've researched and studied, but I'm more informed mostly by my experiences. But the idea, even like a light entity, right? I don't think that's an extraterrestrial intelligence. I think that's something else. I think maybe, again, maybe somebody might call that an extra dimensional being or an angel or something like that. Like that thing probably doesn't need a spaceship or UFO even. I don't think that thing needs a craft to manifest or be telepathic or whatever. I don't think it's using that kind of technology. It seems more consciousness derived and embodied. So, and again, we're coming to this point in time in our history where it's not just UFOs, right? It's not even just telepathy, right? Even those two things are like, holy shit, right? Both of them are incredible, but they're both telling us different things about reality, right? Because we have an object here that's coming in and doing all these things. That's one thing, but we have this telepathic phenomenon, even amongst humans, via the telepathy tapes, that's showing us, if this is possible, what does that mean about the nature of reality? How is the information transferring from here to here without any means of relaying that information? And that gets into extrasensory perception, right? So, and all of these discoveries they've kind of been there in the background the whole time, but they're coming online, I think, as the spiral dynamic folks will say. Like, all these things are coming to the fore in this part in our evolution, probably because we're just evolving more consciously, and we're going to continue to. And I think as we evolve, right, consciously, we're going to become aware of more and more things. And because of that, we're going to make more scientific discoveries. Like, I don't think any of the stuff that's like metaphysical is any kind of magic where it's like, wow, it's just magical. There's no reason for it. No, I think everything has a cause and effect and rules and mechanism in which it operates that we're just ignorant to it. Just like a 1,000 years ago or a few hundred years ago, we weren't aware of, just say like 300 years ago, we didn't know what quantum physics was or quantum mechanics was, right? But now we can observe it. So now it's real all of a sudden. So all this other stuff that's coming up, like telepathy and UFOs, it's coming up at a point in time where I think our awareness is mature to the level that we can make sense of it in a way or shape or form and try to fit it into our current paradigm. But it's going to ultimately transform our paradigm. So I think it's not just one thing. The commonality in all of them is our consciousness. And that's why the consciousness studies aspect, I think, is so important, is because it's through our consciousness in which we observe and interact with all these different facets of reality.
I'm so glad, like, we talk about, bathrooms and toilets and stuff. Yeah. 150 years ago, the concept of indoor plumbing would have seemed ludicrous to the people living in America or any place like that. But you also mentioned, the concept that people, and I'm with you, man. People think like the theory of relativity is the absolute, like you can't breach the speed of light. It can't be done because our present understanding of physics won't allow it. And I'm like, yeah, but like you're saying, some society that's 1,000, a million years ahead of us, they probably figured that out, and it would laugh at our intransigent sort of way of thinking about things and saying we solved that stuff like millennia ago, that sort of thing. Here's how you do it. Transparent aluminum, like in Star Trek 4, that sort of thing. So I'm glad you said that, because I agree with you. It seems like, and maybe there's wormholes and maybe they figured out ways to punch through dimensions, and it's not just strictly breaching the speed of light. But yeah, And I agree with you. But like, and I know like you've had Pavel from Psychoactiva on your show before, and he's been posting the last couple of days about this whole notion that there's a segment of especially in government who are looking at this from the more religious kind of like painting this with the demonic brush, right? Oh, this stuff is all demonic. If we get too far down this path, we're going to damn ourselves and all this sort of stuff. And I get where that's coming from, and I don't buy into it, but that vocal, even if they're a minority, they're a very vocal minority. And do you think that that vocal minority is really having a much bigger factor in preventing any sort of disclosure than maybe we're giving it credit for?
I mean, potentially, I think this is going to find its way to the public one way or another in its own time if we don't accelerate it. But I mean, that idea, they've been here the whole time anyways, right? So
Right.
I think that mentality, it may be inhibiting us in one shape or form, but it's not, I don't even think that is going to hold, right? To whatever influence they have. I mean, again, there's people talk about the Collins elite, and they're individuals in government and places of power that can have an awareness of the UFO phenomenon, but they try to block progress on it because they believe if the world is aware of UFOs, that we're welcoming the UFO phenomenon to manifest into our reality through consent of awareness. They've been here the whole time, right? I don't think that, I mean, I don't want to say, oh man, those people are wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. So let's hear their perspective, but they have to be transparent with us, right? Especially if they want to say in the conversation, because people are just going to move on without them anyways. So if they want to have a seat at the table and be transparent and share with us, great. If they don't, people are going to go over them.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Coming back to the ground a bit, talking a little bit more about disclosure. The fight for disclosure is ongoing. Took another hit this week as UAPDA got shot down for the third consecutive year. We're now about a month out from the last hearing that took place. And on your show, Engaging the Phenomenon, like right after the last hearing, you guys did a great job. It was you, Pavel, Reed Summers, Ryan Robbins, all on Engaging the Phenomenon. You had a tremendous discussion recapping the key aspects of the hearing, which I don't want to go into a full-blown recitation of that. But I guess a month out, are you looking at anything that came out of the hearing differently? And I know Dylan Borland's been on Weaponized the last couple of weeks, talking a lot about some disturbing aspects of whistleblowing and retaliation and things like that. But I'm just wondering, about a month out, are you looking at anything that came out of that hearing a little differently?
I mean, whistleblowers coming forward is I think part of the whole process. I'm glad that more individuals are coming forward and sharing their experience and their story. And, when people come forward from the military, or they have some kind of first-hand involvement, especially they're a government employee, it's powerful to the public to hear from somebody like that. And to me, it's a shame that these people have to live like that. And I know people are worried about disinformation and, oh, this person's a disinformation agent, and or what have you, right? There's all different perspectives on, oh, what are these people doing actually coming out? But I mean, I think there's a lot of genuine people who have had experiences who are coming out and sharing their testimony, and we should support those people coming forward and testifying, right? I mean, again, the recent testimony just highlights like how these people are being treated, by their own, right? They didn't ask to have this experience. It's something that they had while during their service, and they believe that the public deserves to know. And again, it's when you're talking about the UFO phenomenon, there is a theater very similar to wrestling, right? People will say, "Oh, wrestling's fake." And I heard somebody once say, it's not fake. People are being freaking slammed, dude. But it is coordinated, right? So
Predetermined.
yeah,
Predetermined.
predetermined.
Right.
So there's that level of the UFO phenomenon, when it comes to the government and the intelligence community, which there is like this narrative control aspect to it. And I mean, in some sense, don't think like, oh, you're going to get ahead of them. They're very organized and strategic in what they're doing. But at the end of the day, the more people we have talking about it, the better, I think. But you just have to be cognizant of the different elements that are active, right? But with the hearing, again, I hope to hear from more people. I hope that whistleblowers have better protections, and that even, if it's coming from government, right? Because people will say, oh, well, it's coming from the government, you can't trust it. I mean, depending on what kind of disclosure you're hoping for, asking for, I mean, you can only get it from the people that have it in some sense. And if you're skeptical of the government or even whistleblowers, and this person's a plant, this person's a whistleblower, or whatever it is, your only other options are to do it yourself, right? And that's why I appreciate things like SEAT, right? You can have your own direct experience. And, so coming out of the hearing, I hope that there are more hearings, right? I think that it is helpful to the public. And it reminds me of, Jacques Vallée's 6-layer model, where he's talking about the social and cultural effects of the UFO phenomenon. So, I mean, like, ultimately, we have to hit those levels. Ultimately, we have to have this conversation publicly. And, I don't know in what way, shape, or form that disclosure is actually going to occur, but I think it's more conducive to having that, whatever that disclosure is to have more people coming forward, sharing their information.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's an important aspect of things, and I want to get your opinion on Dylan Borland's not the only one who talks about the concept of catastrophic disclosure, and I think during the hearing you had Joe Spielberger talking about how the national security whistleblowers really don't have a lot of protection and that sort of thing. This concept of catastrophic disclosure, though, do you think there's any whistleblower out there that maybe we don't know about yet who could drop something, like an Edward Snowden sort of level of disclosure that would actually be catastrophic? Or is this just kind of semantics, that sort of thing? You could throw catastrophic disclosure around like a couple buzzwords and get people excited about it. But in your opinion, is there anybody who's got access to that level of information that could just dump a million documents on the people of the world and say, here it is? And I get what you're saying, like, get your own experience from CE5, but I'm just talking more, from a more, I guess, grounded basis. Like, do you think there's something lurking out there like that?
I mean, I do. I think if another nation wanted to go ahead and just disclose this, that they could. And, Colonel Carl Nell, in his presentation at Seoul, and part of how he described catastrophic disclosure, is if another nation state beside, we're in the United States here. If an adversarial country came out and disclosed it and kind of got the jump on us, kind of make us look real dumb, bad. Like we're hiding everything, and these are the new people who are going to lead the free world. That's not a good look, right? I mean, the idea of controlled disclosure is you can gradually introduce this information to the public in a way which can be managed, and the stock markets won't crash, and we can kind of maintain our status quo, right? Versus the catastrophic type disclosure is a drop like that happens, right? Whether it's an insider from the United States or from another nation state, or it's the phenomenon itself that forces disclosure and spirals us into an out of control situation. I mean, every day that there's not transparency, you're risking the potential for some kind of catastrophic disclosure. Because I love Richard Dolan's quote that, disclosure is impossible, yet it's inevitable. It's going to happen one way or another. If it's real, the truth will be known. And I don't think that the people that want controlled disclosure are bad guys, right? It's their profession, it's their job to make sure that things don't get out of hand. If they're in intelligence and national security, their job is to secure our well-being. And you have with catastrophic disclosure, there's all types of unknown risks. I know this because I'm involved in security and emergency management, right? Like if I were to let something get by my, past my job or whatever, man, I'm, not only am I in a ton of shit personally, but that could be a security risk from the point of you don't know what's going to happen. And that level of, that kind of breach is not good, right? From their point of view. So I don't think the people that are doing those jobs necessarily are bad guys. Again, unless you're talking about people who are harassing whistleblowers and attacking them, their own, right? That's heinous. So yeah, those guys that are doing those kind of things, they are bad guys, and the hell with them. I believe those people should face whatever charges are allotted to them. That's just wrong. So there's a level to it. The people who are not just fully being transparent about everything they know, that's a different story, right? But people who are actively harassing whistleblowers on behalf of a contractor or national security, whatever, that's bullshit. And fuck those people, to be honest. So again, that's why you need to have these kind of conversations, because it's nuanced and it's complicated, and we're humans and we're imperfect. So, nobody knows the right way to go about it, right? I mean, the people that want controlled disclosure, I'm sure, think that this is absolutely the best path forward, right? For us to succeed as a country, as a nation, as a people, as a world, right? Because there's a lot of unknown and potential risks that can occur from a catastrophic disclosure. But then you get into all these moral arguments of like, who has the right to withhold information on the nature of reality? Like withholding the fact that the earth is not flat, right? Like it's a nature of reality thing. It's like, who are you to withhold that information from, not only the general public, but taxpayers who are paying for the research being done? So you get into all these ethical and moral arguments as well, and there's a lot of layers to it. And that's why I appreciate I've had Jim Semivan on Engaging the Phenomenon, and he's had people come to him and say, Jim, do you really want to go there? Do you really want to do this? And do you really want to explain to little kids and basically to the world that there's these entities out there that can do whatever they want, and there's nothing we can do about it? So I understand those arguments, and even Jim Semivan himself, he's bringing those opinions, but he's on the side of a controlled disclosure. But he does think that there needs to be a disclosure. And I think that within what people call the legacy UFO programs, there are people on both sides of the fence. There's people that say, like, we're not going to release the information of the technology that we've got and the weapons that we made on this, and even the tracking systems and all this other stuff that we've reverse engineered. We're not going to let that out, but people need to know the fundamental aspect of reality, that we're not alone and we're being visited. People need to know that. They have a need to know. And there's people on the other side of the legacy group that say absolutely effing not. And that's kind of where we are. And it's going to continue like that until eventually one day something happens, right? And that's broken. And if it has to come from a catastrophic disclosure, it will, right? Because we're not in control. And part of the stagecraft of, just like in wrestling, right? The narrative kind of thing, right? The government would like you to believe that they're in control, and they're withholding the information. To some degree they are, but they're not. They're ones in control. The phenomenon, if it wanted to at any damn time, could just make everything clear. And there's been a lot of experiencers, including myself, who had like visions or dreams of such an event happening. And I guess now, like I think there are conversations and negotiations being made on what information should be let out. And I think Carl Nell's Soul thing was a pitch to people in the legacy program to say, hey, there is a way we can do this, and here's like a modest idea of how we can go about doing it. in a way that he can communicate to other people within classified programs that he can't directly communicate to that way because there would be a breach of security, So I think that we're in that kind of rift right now. And I mean, hey, if it has to happen through catastrophic disclosure, I mean, I that might not be what's best for us, but we might not have the liberty to have a controlled disclosure if they don't get on with it.
I just want to say, James, I'm glad you dropped the first F-bomb on this episode because I know people who listen to this show are going to be like, God, Dave's awfully fucking subdued for the way I normally am.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, I am
I'm trying to be like, not my normal, just talking like a sailor sort of thing, but
I
it's
should have asked you before. I didn't know what
no,
the thing is on this channel. I am
my
a New
my friend,
Yorker.
if you I hear you. Anybody who's listening to this show would be like, "Oh yeah, you're fine, man.
Yeah.
You're more than fine." I've kept you here long enough, so I want to close this down. But I did want to ask kind of some more fun, lighter topics of you real quick. Like we talked off air, you're wearing your Stranger Things shirt. We got the final season. Yep, there it is. Perfect, beautiful. We got the final season coming up. Are there other like movies, series, documentaries dealing kind of with this? I mean, I'm not talking about strictly UAPs, but just kind of this, Stranger Things is a great example because that's taking in all sorts of aspects of the phenomenon. Are there other shows like that or things like that that you really enjoy?
Man, I mean, I think that our entire culture is littered with these kind of ideas and concepts. I mean, like, The Matrix, right? I love the original, especially the original one. Yeah, and the trilogy. About this notion about that we're living in something like a false reality. I think that's a powerful idea. I don't think it's as exactly like the movie is, but also, yeah, you mentioned before Skynet, that kind of potential of artificial intelligence. I think there's a lot of interesting fiction that has like insightful notions about reality and even the phenomenon. There's I I don't watch too many movies, but I'm sure if I sat here and thought about it, there'd be a lot of different things that came up. One one movie that really stands out to me as far as a UFO movie that I think gets to some ideas of these topics that is very interesting is that movie Arrival. That's based on the short story where there's like these crafts that come in all of a sudden and they're hovering over like the major countries and cities of the earth. I mean, and we're trying to find a way to communicate with these non-human intelligences, and they bring in a linguist and scientists and all this. But the whole kind of story, I don't want to spoil the story, but the way it ends, and then you have to reevaluate the whole story and the chain of events and how it happened. That speaks a lot to the reality of the UFO phenomenon and perception, time, space, and that whole thing. Also, like Interstellar, right? I thought that was a fantastic film that, I think expands awareness, right? So I think there's a lot of those things in art and even myth and culture that speaks to the UFO phenomenon, the nature of reality. And yeah, there's a lot of good ones. And Stranger Things, I mean, the creators were inspired in part by the Montauk Project, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot. I think there's a lot in Stranger Things that's like, I see where they took this from, but also that has genuine elements to it, even if it's it's a fiction story that has a lot of fantasy and those kind of circumstances that are fabricated, but there's like elements of truth to some of it, I believe. And for all the parents out there, uh and this is so funny how this stuff is woven into all of our media, actually, and has been for decades. The K-pop demon hunters,
almost intentional, right?
yeah, no, I mean, even the idea in K-pop demon hunters where there's these demons and they're entities and they're feeding off people's energy, right? Is very Gnostic idea, where it's very similar if you've heard about Gnosticism and the archons, and they feed off our, that kind of thing. And we're in this. So, yeah, there's a lot in the different fiction and media that speak to this.
Have you ever see District 9? Have you
I
ever seen
have,
that
yeah.
one?
Yeah, and that's a yeah.
I can't help but think humanity would react that way in that situation.
Right,
And it's
right.
terrifying, but it's like, yeah, we would absolutely ostracize and try and just enslave and put them in some slum somewhere. If the entity actually came here and needed our help, what would we do? Would we, if we could exercise some sort of advantage over them, we'd absolutely do it. So that's one that really stands out to me. I know you mentioned the Hudson Valley sightings, and I know you said before that that's kind of like your favorite UFO related event because, it happened in your backyard, that sort of thing. Are there any other like UFO, UAP related sightings of events that you put on an extra high level of like credibility?
I mean, I just have to say my own experiences are what mostly inform me, right?
Right.
There's so much out there, and to some extent, if it's not your own experience, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But one such story that speaks greatly to me because of my experience is the Dorothy Izat story, or the story of Dorothy Izat, who was very much an experiencer, similar to how we have Christopher Bledsoe is very well known now. Dorothy Izat was just a regular individual, and she started having these experiences, and she could reproduce them, and she brought witnesses, and she has a very interesting message, and it has to do with consciousness and reality and all that stuff. So as far as cases, I mean, the Hudson Valley UFO wave definitely speaks to me because I've spoken to a ton of the witnesses. There are people in my own community that I've every once in a while I'll bring up UFOs, and I'm somewhere and you find somebody who said, it was me or my parent or my cousin or one of my friends was at such and such place, and they saw this giant boomerang. And so I mean that's close to home for me, but there's a ton out there. The Zimbabwe, the Royal Zimbabwe case, the Ariel School event is a powerful one. Again, stories like Sixto Paswell's and Mission Rama. I mean, they have dogma in their story because they created a mythos or kind of belief system a bit around their encounters, but that's because people will do that when they have an experience like this, right? Even Dr. Stephen Greer, right? I appreciate his story and his coming out. He is a highly controversial character, but if you disregard the personality stuff, if you actually listen to his material, when it talks about CE5 and contact and consciousness, the guy's right on, and he's ahead of the curve than most people when it comes to contact and non-human intelligence. I don't know if there's anybody in the public venue who's put out more intricate information in regards to that. He's in my opinion one of the best out there on that, and he can speak to the subtleties through his own experience. There's a ton out there, and I don't want to say like the nuclear incidents are some of my favorite because it sounds alarming to people. But if you're looking for credible cases of UFO events and the United States military and government's reaction to the actual reality of these objects, you have to look at UFOs and Nukes book, right? That book. I mean, there was a short documentary made too, but the book is just incredible. And it's like undeniable in the sense that there's something going on, right? That these objects are coming in, they're able to turn ICBMs off they're all on separate systems just so something can't come in and shut them all off if they're on the same system. So they're all on separate
Let's turn them
systems.
on. Turn them
And
on in Russia.
right. Which, I mean, and again, that gets to some of the fiction and nonfiction where the Secret Machines series, the nonfiction version does touch on that too. I mean, again, were the non-human intelligence trying to send us some kind of message, or were they trying to create a war? Right? Like I really don't know. I don't think they were. I think if they wanted to do it, they would have just went on with it. But yeah, there's so much out there. I would say anybody curious into the UFO phenomenon, check out Richard Dolan's first 2 volumes, UFOs in the National Security State, is very like nuts and bolts. It's like ufology 101, but it's all excellently documented historical data regarding the UFO phenomenon. And if you're just getting off and you want to say, is this actually real? Is there a nuts and bolts thing? Read those books, for sure.
My last question for you, James, and this is going to tie into the pro wrestling aspect of things. So, pro wrestling podcasters, fans, analysts, we love this concept of the Mount Rushmores, right? The Mount Rushmore. Who's the best wrestlers of all time? Who's the best person on the mic? What are the best matches? So, my last question to you, James, is who is on your Mount Rushmore of ufology?
I mean, for people, it's going to be different, right? Because they're gonna if someone's more nuts and bolts or more into the consciousness study stuff, but my list is probably going to be a little weird. Definitely Jacques Vallée, right? He's somebody who's, in my opinion, an forward and insightful thinker into the UFO phenomenon, and that he doesn't just settle for everything at face value. He's a deep thinker. And I think just reading his books or listening to him, you can grasp that idea of like, let's not think inside the box, right? We're dealing with something that is advanced, and therefore we can't just rely on our preconceived notions investigating the UFO phenomenon. We need to transcend that level of thinking. And I think he demonstrates that. John Keel is somebody who is very intense, and he's wild in a sort of way, but in some spots, he's right on and broke through a lot of conventional thinking as well. So I mean, there's a lot of people who just broke through conventional thinking that are forward thinkers, in my opinion. But again, even somebody like Dr. Stephen Greer, right? I don't think we would be where we are right now if it wasn't for the Disclosure Project. It was not just him who did that. Let me just be clear on that. There were a lot of people involved in those early days, like Leslie Kean was involved in different ways. Dr. Edgar Mitchell was. Commander Will Miller, who was Stephen Greer's military advisor. So the Disclosure Project really represents a broader, range of people. But Dr. Stephen Greer did play an important part of that. And he did lay down the foundations of the CE5 initiative, in my opinion. Right. There was things like CE5 before, but he framed it and he created the CE5 initiative in a very contemporary way for the modern day kind of thinking, I think, in my opinion, and organized it nicely and pragmatically. Yeah. But I mean, I want to say all the whistleblowers, anybody who's got skin in the game, in the sense where they've laid something down for sharing the reality of this is commendable. Right. So I guess you can say there's a Mount Rushmore, but there's a lot of giants. Stanton Friedman, I grew up listening to him as well, and he was just so articulate and factual, and he looked at the data and was such a great debater and communicator on even just the nuts and bolts aspect of this stuff. He was a nuclear physicist who left his career and did this full time. And unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. And I wish he was still around to see all this stuff. Stanton Friedman is a giant on there around Mount Rushmore. And I have to say, I'm honored in some sense that his last tweet was a retweet of a tweet that I made. Of some of his quotes. It was like I made a little screen graphic of it's like his 4 or 5 arguments of the UFO reality, and it was his last tweet. He retweeted that, and I'm honored to have spoken to him, before he passed. When I first started getting into podcasting in 2018, an individual, Frank, who I was doing a podcast with, Frank Salter, and me, did get to interview him shortly before he passed. So that was great to be able to have spoken to him. But again, I mean, there's also, she'll catch a lot of flack these days, but Linda Moulton Howe, right? For women, I mean, incredible. This was not popular, and she was like a mainstream journalist who tackled this and did it full time, right? Just so that my Mount Rushmore is
It's all over. Yeah.
it's all over, and it's really big because there's James McDonald, right? The guy, I believe, is one of the individuals who was a targeted individual who they ruined his life. And ultimately, he died as a direct result of this subject, in my opinion. And he was a hero for this topic. If you're serious about the UFO reality, James McDonald is one of those individuals. Dr. John Mack,
Yeah.
I have quite a list, and even people like Dr. Diana Pasulka, her work and contributions in this field, I think, are great. Dr. Gary Nolan, but there's also like the unsung heroes, right? In my opinion, Grant Cameron is like way ahead of the curve on some stuff. He's just he's somebody I look up to as a researcher in this field. Richard Dolan, of course, right? Like Richard Dolan is the fucking man. When it comes to UFOs,
Yes.
I mean, I was watching him early on and I just loved how he was able to have a balanced discussion without going too far one way or too far the other, going over historical facts, stating clear when he was speculating. Yeah.
Yeah, the work that he's doing with USOs, which is in my opinion, this is someplace that's not being explored enough, is the USO phenomenon and kind of, what he's got in volume one. I know he's got another volume coming out, and it's like, it just makes sense that, like you're saying, they've been with us the whole time. They've been here for very long. It would make sense that the oceans, which we haven't explored for shit, is going to be where they're hanging out at, especially ocean floors, Puerto Rican Trench. I'm over here in California. So yeah, right off the coast,
Yeah.
Catalina Island is
Yeah.
a massive hot spot. So I love the work Richard's doing with the USOs because I don't think it's getting nearly enough attention, and he's really bringing that to the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. There has been a little into the USO category over the years, but I think, Richard is putting together prolific and credible volumes in an organized way. And then, yeah, excellent work. Rich, any book he puts out is worth reading. He's just has a great way of conveying information. So yeah, that list, my
Yeah,
Mount Rushmore is, I got a huge Mount Rushmore, and even back on this book, my bookshelf over here, you see this book CE5.
uh,
It's actually written by Dr. Richard Haynes, who was a NASA
there you
guy,
go.
and I think he's one of the people that decided like, hey, we're going to use the term UAP so it doesn't get confused with the UFO and is not, the scientific community can look at it in this way. And they put together a ton of sightings by pilots, so him and his organization, they were doing great work. I mean, the list goes on. I'm not, there's many people I'm not mentioning, and
Right.
there's many out there,
No, it's a tough, and I know it's a tough question, and so I appreciate you going down and listing various alternatives and options, and I agree with everything. I think the only one you didn't mention who I'd put on mine is probably George Knapp. I mean,
George, yeah,
I
of course,
felt
I mean, George Knapp for sure. He's the OG, right?
yeah,
and I mean, again, there's controversy. His people will say, oh, his connection to Lazar and all this, and to the OSAP,
but even
but
I don't know if
he's a
even he
legend.
buys into all that. I don't even know if he even buys into all of what Bob's told him, but it was the way he broke into the whole concept, the whole topic was that. And I mean, you can't, yeah, like, more wrestling parlance. He stole the show at the hearing. I mean, really, out of all,
Yeah, and
he really stole the show.
the Bob Lazar thing too is like, that wasn't. It's not like nothing happened. There's something to his story, right? Because
Yes.
if he didn't just see everything he saw and that's not the reality of it, there's some kind of involvement with like the government, or because there's no way that he would have been in, I mean, again, I know that, Dr. Eric Davis has spoken out and said
Sure.
everything he said, but I mean, again, he knew where the tests were going to be, when and where. He was in the Area 51 book, the cattle, where they were looking up the numbers and everything. Robert Lazar was in the book. I mean, there's something going on with that. If people want to say it was counterintelligence or was a psyop, there's something to his story. It's not just made up. I
Well,
believe. I think.
the fact that Area 51 exists, and
Correct.
basically was acknowledged because of what he said. You can get into the intricacies of what he said and how much of it is factual, how much of it is fabricated, but the fact remains, hey, he talked about this, and the government reluctantly confirmed, yeah, this is where it is. And now everybody's climbing to the top of Tikaboo Peak and taking a look down, and the rest is tourist attractions and history, man.
Yeah,
Look,
yeah.
James, I really want to thank you so much for spending, I kept you here a little bit longer than I thought I was going to, but I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with me and talk about this stuff. It's fascinating. And it was a great conversation. Before I let you go, man, let people know, where can they check out Engaging the Phenomenon, or if they want to connect with you on social media or anything like that, where can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can find me Engaging the Phenomenon on YouTube. I am on Spotify, but YouTube is my main platform. You can also find me on X at Engaging the. Um, I'm on Instagram, Engaging the Phenomenon. So and it is on the podcast platforms, but for some reason I have an issue with Apple Podcast. I don't know. I went back and forth with them. It's like a whole thing. But for sure, if you're going to listen to it on Spotify.
Awesome. James, thank you so much. And honestly, man, when we get to the part of unidentified history where we cover the Hudson Valley sightings, I hope I can reach out to you and have you come on and talk to us about that, because I can't imagine anybody knows any more about that than you do.
Well,
So I would
but
love to have you.
believe it or not, there's somebody, I don't know if she does interviews, but Linda Zimmerman, she's written some books on it as well. And if you could get her on, that should definitely be a good to have her on to talk about it too.
I will definitely check into that. James, thank you again so much, my friend, and you have yourself a great evening.
Yes, sir. You too. Thanks for having me on. It's great talking.
Guys, that is going to do it for this episode of Unidentified History. I really hope everybody enjoyed that episode. I cannot, of course, thank James Iandoli from Engaging the Phenomenon nearly enough for coming on the show and spending I took up way too much of James's time. So I apologize for that, but, we just kind of lost track of it. It was a great conversation. And I really hope everybody enjoyed that conversation and tune into James's show. Absolutely. On YouTube, and I think it's on Spotify as well. It's a phenomenal show, and I don't use the word phenomenon loosely, although maybe I am, because that aptly describes what James is doing. But to cut out of here, let me give you guys some contact information. If you want to engage with me on social media, you can follow me on X and on Blue Sky. It is at AttitudeAg. That is at AttitudeAGG. Facebook.com/attitude of aggression, and at attitude of aggression, all one word, on Instagram and on Threads. Please go to the website, www.attitudeofaggression.com. That's got the wrestling podcast. It's got all the episodes of Unidentified History that we've done so far, including the history and analysis documents that we do for all the historical deep dives. That is there as well. And of course, if you're a Game of Thrones fan and you want to check out Game Gone Wrong, which is our Game of Thrones side project, which is getting close to being done, you can check that out there as well. If you listen to the show, right now we're on Apple Podcasts. We're about to hit Spotify as of tonight, actually. I got verification that I don't know when the show will show up there, but it's probably going to be in the next couple days. And I think I mentioned this episode is going to be the very first episode of Attitude of Aggression to ever go up on YouTube, at least in full video. We did like one episode a long time ago where it was just the audio of an interview that we did with the grappler Lynn Denton way back in the day. But this episode with James is going to be the first one that is a full video episode going up on YouTube. That'll be coming up. So keep your eyes out for more of that. And if you like what I'm doing, what we're doing here on the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. Lets people know that we're not just some hacks out here and we don't know what we're talking about. So I greatly appreciate all of that. That, my friends, is going to do it for this episode. And until next time, keep looking to the sky, keep looking in the ocean. We'll be back really soon with another edition of Unidentified History. Until then, everybody take care, and thank you again. And thanks again to James Iandoli. Cannot say enough great things about James. We'll catch you guys soon.